This is one of those stories you'd never believe could actually happen, but it did. Her name is Martha Collins, a 75-year-old woman, a fighter, a widow who raised her only daughter by the sweat of her brow, cleaning houses and sewing for a living. After losing her husband early, she did whatever it took to secure her daughter's future, even if it meant giving up on herself. And it was for that very daughter, now a millionaire and happily married, that she was abandoned in a nursing home, all so that the house Martha poured her heart into, where she raised her daughter on her own, could be claimed as though it never belonged to anyone. But her daughter, Jessica, forgot one crucial detail. That house, that deed, was still in the name of the woman she pretended to forget. Get ready to hear a story that will shake you from start to finish. Like, share, and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Mrs. Martha, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you raised with your own blood and tears? Get ready, because what I'm about to share isn't easy to hear, and it was even harder to live through. I'm 75 years old, carrying around scars that no medicine can heal. But you know what hurts even more than abandonment? The silence that comes after. That deafening, lonely silence when you realize your own flesh and blood chose things over you. The story I'm going to tell is about how my own daughter left me in a nursing home so she could take my house, a house I earned through decades of hard work and blistered hands. But it's also the story of how, even at 75, I discovered it's never too late to fight for what's yours, and most importantly, for your dignity. Some of you might see your own pain reflected in my words. Others perhaps might see your own children, but I'm certain everyone will understand. As long as we're breathing, we can keep fighting. My name is Martha Collins. I'm 75 now, but I was just 20 when it all began. I was born in a rundown tenement on the south side of Chicago, daughter of a housekeeper and a city bus driver. My mom, Loretta, left for work before sunrise and didn't get home until after 9 p.m., 6 days a week. My father, Frank, worked rotating shifts, and we barely saw him. Our apartment was a single room divided by faded floral curtains. I remember the smell of mildew that crept up the walls whenever it rained, blending with the aroma of beans forever simmering on the stove, trying to make the gas last. That slow-cooked bean smell was the background note of my childhood, sometimes comforting, sometimes a reminder of our never-ending struggle to stretch every dollar. At 16, I started working as a seamstress apprentice at Mr. O'Connor's garment factory, a gruff Irishman with calloused hands and few words. He paid me half what the other seamstresses made because, in his words, "You haven't got the hang of it yet." Every cent went straight to my mother, who stashed it away in a cocoa tin hidden behind a loose bathroom tile. It was there, in that maze of thread and fabric, that I met Joe. He was the delivery driver for the factory, a quiet guy, ready smile, but a distant look in his eyes. We started with glances, then notes, then one day he asked if I'd join him for a milkshake after work. I fell hard for the gentleness in his voice, a voice that spoke dreams I'd never dared imagine for myself. Our courtship was short and careful. My father was adamantly against it. "Driving trucks leads nowhere, honey. Look at me." But Joe was determined. He wanted to become a CPA, took night classes, and promised me that one day we'd have a place of our own. We married when I was 19 in a simple city hall ceremony, followed by lunch in his parents' backyard in Bridgeport. My father didn't even show. My mom came, but she looked like she was at a funeral. Marriage is a jail, honey. You'll see. In some ways, she was right. Joe changed after the marriage certificate. The big, dreaming young man turned into someone weighed down by disappointment. He never finished his accounting classes. The delivery job got tougher, the bills grew higher, and to him, it was always somehow my fault. "If you just worked more, Martha. If you'd learned to budget better, Martha. If you hadn't bought that new pot, Martha." We lived in a small back apartment at his cousin's place. We shared a bathroom with 3 other families. At night, with the window open to escape the heat, I'd hear neighbors arguing, kids crying, mice scurrying across the tin roof. Those tiny claws scratching metal are a sound I've never forgotten. It's the soundtrack to how powerless I felt. The first time Joe raised his voice was when he found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. We were already drowning in debt, and a baby meant more money we didn't have. He stayed out all night at the corner bar, came home reeking of cheap whiskey, and yelled that I'd done it on purpose to trap him for good. 9 months later, Jessica was born. A little girl with wide, restless eyes like her dad's, and a quiet resolve I inherited from my mother. When I first placed her in Joe's arms, I saw a flicker of the old dreamer return. He kissed kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll give her a good life, Martha. You'll see." And he tried, in his own way. He picked up a second job as a night watchman. He squirreled away every spare dollar. He bought me a used Singer sewing machine so I could pick up tailoring work from home while caring for Jessica. Things got a little better, but at what cost? Joe barely slept. Sometimes I'd find him slumped in our only armchair, eyes open but miles away. That old Singer sewing machine became my truest companion. The rhythmic creak of the pedal underfoot, the steady motion of the needle. Somehow, the routine hush of the mechanism was the only peace I got. While I sewed, I dreamed. And in the midst of all that hardship, that machine became not only my means of survival, but also my pathway to the self-respect I didn't know I still had. And when Joe died, that Singer was what kept us afloat. But that's the next chapter. It's the story of how I lost everything, even my daughter, before finding something much bigger than a house. Joe's heart attack happened on a regular Tuesday in March. I was altering a communion dress for a client's little girl when the phone rang. On the other end was a breathless co-worker from the delivery company. "Martha, Joe just collapsed. Hospital. You better get here fast." I dropped everything. I asked our neighbor to pick Jessica up from school and rushed to Mercy General Hospital. I was too late. Joe was already gone when I arrived. A massive heart attack at just 42. Standing there in the cold, sterile corridor of a public hospital, clutching a death certificate in my trembling hands, it hit me. I was completely alone. I returned home in a daze. Jessica, just 10, was waiting in her pajamas, eyes wide with worry. "Where's Daddy?" she asked. The words got stuck in my throat. How do you explain death to a child who still believes in fairy tales? "Daddy had to go on a long trip, honey," was all I managed that night. Later on, after she finally drifted off to sleep, I opened the drawer where Joe kept our important papers. The reality was even harsher than I imagined. Debts piled high in yellowing envelopes, a loan for the down payment on the used car he drove for the delivery company, receipts from the hardware store where he'd bought materials for our unfinished dream of a house, overdue payments for the night school classes he never finished. At the very bottom, a small, almost symbolic life insurance policy. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed where my daughter slept, I made the decision that would change our lives forever. I wouldn't tell anyone how bad things really were. I wouldn't let Jessica grow up feeling the weight of poverty like I had. The insurance money lasted 4 months. After that, I started selling what little we could do without. Joe's wristwatch, his only good suit, even my wedding ring. During the day, I sewed until my fingers went numb. At night, while Jessica slept, I'd take the bus downtown to clean office buildings. It was in one of those offices that I met Richard Monroe, a prominent attorney, owner of a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, and the kind of old money arrogance that comes from never having to count your change. He'd watch me as I wiped down the mahogany furniture in his office, often staying late to finish an important case, or so he claimed. One evening, he made me an offer. He needed someone trustworthy to look after his house in the Hudson Valley where he spent weekends. The pay was 3 times what I earned from all my cleaning jobs combined. The only catch, I'd have to move there with my daughter. "Think about it, Martha," he said, swirling whiskey in a crystal tumbler. "A real house for your girl to grow up in. Better schools, fresh air. What more could a widow in your shoes want?" What he didn't say, though the look in his eyes told me everything, was what he really expected from me. I was 39, and the mirror still reflected a woman who turned heads on the street. And Richard, despite being around 60 and married, didn't bother to hide his interest. I turned him down immediately. He smiled, a knowing kind of smile, as if he understood that time and desperation would work in his favor. "The offer stands. If you change your mind, let me know." The next month, Jessica fell ill. A severe case of pneumonia drained everything. I had left. Medications, doctor's visits, tests. When she finally recovered, I was buried in even more debt, 2 months behind on rent, the landlord pounding on the door, threatening eviction. Richard's business card, tucked at the bottom of my purse, felt heavier with each passing night. I'd stare at it after Jessica fell asleep, weighing my ever-narrowing options. Our next move was coming, whether by choice or because we'd run out of road. The house in the Hudson Valley was breathtaking, a stately old home with tall windows and creaking hardwood floors, tucked away among ancient trees. The scent of polished wood and lavender from the linens seemed almost unreal after years in cramped, damp apartments. Jessica had a room all to herself, with a bookshelf full of stories I could never have given her. "Mom, look, I even have a desk to study at," she exclaimed on that first day, running around like a bird finally freed from its cage. Her excitement was the only thing that muffled the heaviness in my heart. The first 2 weeks felt like a strange dream. I cooked, cleaned, tended the garden. Richard only showed up on weekends, bringing Jessica gifts and offering me flowery compliments. "Martha, you've transformed this place," he'd say, his eyes roaming over me in a way that left my skin crawling. By week 3, the dynamic changed. Richard started appearing on random nights, always late. Meetings ran over. He'd explain, pouring himself a drink. One night, after Jessica was asleep, he finally made his intentions clear. "You know, Martha, your daughter is really thriving here. It'd be such a shame to cut that short," he said casually, moving closer. The alcohol on his breath made me back away. "There's no need to make this difficult. I just want your company now and then." I refused. He laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. "Think carefully. A woman in your situation doesn't have many options." From then on, the house became a gilded cage. Richard didn't fire me. That would have been too easy. Instead, he played a calculated game of power. He slashed my pay in half, claiming extra expenses from Jessica's education. He'd enrolled her at the best private school in the area without my consent. "It's an investment in her future," he said when I protested. "Unless you'd rather pull her out and head back to that shoebox apartment in the city." My daughter, just 10, was already shining at school. Teachers raved about her potential, promising scholarships down the road. How was I supposed to take all that away from her? The months that followed were a daily exercise in humiliation. Richard controlled every cent I received. He insisted I wear the clothes he bought for me, the perfumes he picked out. Whenever guests came over, he'd introduce me as his special house assistant, with a tone that made the men smile and the women shoot me barely concealed looks of pity or suspicion. During the day I worked in silence, swallowing my tears. At night, lying in the servants' room, I'd replay memories of our old apartment in the city. I missed the sound of my singer, the only place I'd ever felt truly free. Richard had banished it to the basement, dismissing it as outdated junk. The hardest part of all was pretending for Jessica. She blossomed in that world, made friends with other kids from wealthy families, learned to play piano and speak French, things I could never have given her. She'd ask if I was happy, and I'd force a smile and lie. "Of course I am, sweetheart." Sometimes she'd look at me, suspicion in her eyes, as if she knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. One afternoon, I found Jessica flipping through an old photo album I'd kept, hidden away. "Mom, why don't you sew anymore? I remember you were always at the machine." Her innocent question cut right through me. "We have a better life now, honey. We don't need that anymore." That night, I cried silently into my pillow. What had I become? A woman who denied her own self, trading dignity for material comfort. And yet, every time I thought of running away, I'd look at my daughter sleeping so peacefully and back down. I wasn't trapped by the walls of that mansion. I was shackled by invisible chains of maternal love and fear for the future. 3 years went by in that suffocating routine. I barely recognized myself in the mirror anymore. Dull eyes, a forced smile, hands that always seemed to tremble. Jessica, now 13, was starting to see the reality underneath it all. One morning, as I made breakfast, I felt her thin arms wrapped gently around my waist. "I know you're not happy here, Mom," she whispered, with a maturity that frightened me. "I see the way Mr. Monroe talks to you." I swallowed hard and turned to face her, holding her shoulders. "It's complicated, baby. Adults sometimes have to make hard choices. What if we just left?" she said, hope glimmering in her eyes. "We could start over somewhere else." I kissed her forehead. "It's not that simple." How could I tell her that Richard Monroe was our only support, that leaving would mean ripping her out of that school and those chances she'd worked so hard for? That afternoon, as I was arranging books in the library, one room Richard rarely set foot in, I heard keys jingling at the back door. Mrs. Olivia, the housekeeper from next door, had let herself in with a basket of fresh eggs. Over the years, we'd become unlikely friends, swapping recipes and eventually secrets. "Martha, you look as pale as a ghost," she remarked, giving me a knowing once-over. "You can't go on like this." I broke down. I told her everything. The constant innuendo, the veiled threats, Richard's grip on my finances, the fear of stealing Jessica's future. Olivia listened in silence, her wrinkled hands smoothing a dish towel, as if searching for answers in its seams. "Sweetheart," she finally said, "what that man is doing is criminal. There's a name for it. Harassment, coercion. What can I do? I have nowhere to go. No money, no one," I stammered. A mysterious smile crept onto her face. "Maybe you have more than you think. My son, Michael, is a CPA. He deals with taxes and investments. He could take a look at your situation." 2 weeks later, I met Michael discreetly at a diner in the center of Hudson Valley. A man in his 40s, thick glasses, gentle manners. He listened to my story like a professional, jotting down notes. "Mrs. Collins, you said you received your husband husband's life insurance, right? And used it for immediate expenses? Yes, but it was gone in just a few months. Not all of it, Michael corrected, adjusting his glasses. Based on the statements you brought, about a third was invested, likely at the bank's recommendation. Back then, my heart leapt. And that money? It's still there. It's been growing modestly for almost 4 years now. With accrued interest, it's become a significant sum. The world seemed to stop spinning. Where I'd only seen closed doors, a new possibility appeared, Michael went on. Also, as a widow, you're eligible for Social Security survivor benefits. I can help you with the paperwork. For the first time in years, I felt a faint but undeniable spark come to life inside me. And there's more, he added, lowering his voice. Mom told me how that lawyer's been treating you. That could be considered harassment, maybe even constructive imprisonment. I have a friend who's an attorney who can advise you. I returned to the mansion feeling as if I were carrying a secret fortune. That night, as I tucked Jessica into bed, I saw our elegant room through new eyes. It was beautiful, sure, but not worth the price of my self-respect. You remember that talk about running away? I whispered to her. Maybe it's not such a crazy idea after all. Jessica smiled and squeezed my hand. I always knew you were stronger than you looked, Mom. That was the first night in years that I slept deeply. The future was uncertain, but now at last, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and this time, it wasn't a train barreling toward me. Over the next weeks, I planned our escape with care. With Michael's quiet support, I filed for survivor benefits, accessed the investment account, and even found us a small apartment for rent in Forest Hills, a middle-class neighborhood in Queens. I'd stash any critical documents in the lining of a pillow I sewed at night after the house was asleep. We were just 3 days away from leaving when Richard showed up unannounced on a Wednesday. He brought expensive flowers and wore that calculated smile I'd come to dread, the one he wore right before his worst moods. Martha, we need to talk, he announced, helping himself to more brandy than usual. I've noticed a certain restlessness about you lately. I froze inside but kept my face neutral. Years of practice served me well. I don't know what you mean. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, studying me. You know, I have friends everywhere. At the bank, for example. One of them mentioned an interesting visit you made to a branch recently. He stepped closer, his breath warm with alcohol. Are you planning something, Martha? Panic surged in me, but I managed to mutter some excuse about checking the balance on the little savings account he let me have. Richard pretended to believe me, but his eyes said otherwise. The next morning, I learned what his real move was. Jessica came to breakfast beaming, an envelope clutched in her hands. Mom, look what Mr. Monroe gave me. An application for the study abroad program at my school. I could spend a semester in France. My world fell out from under me. The program was pricey, exclusive, the kind of thing I could never afford alone. It had been Jessica's dream since her first day at that school. He says it's a prize for my grades, she said, eyes shining. He says I have the potential to be someone important, just like him. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the jamb, looking smug. Surprise, he called out with fake cheer. I thought it was a fitting gift for our 4-year anniversary together in this house. After Jessica left, he dropped the act. She leaves in 2 weeks. How long do you think it will take for you to give up on your escape plan and accept your place here with me? You can't do this, I protested, my voice unsteady. She's my daughter. I can, and I already have. Money buys a lot of things, Martha, even opportunities. Do you really want to take all this from her? Tell me, what can you offer that even comes close? That night, as I watched Jessica sleeping, her face bathed in the moonlight through the window, I felt the crushing weight of the impossible choice Richard had forced on me. If we left now, she'd lose the opportunity she'd been dreaming of. If we stayed, I'd remain a prisoner. Worse yet, she'd start to see this deal with the devil as normal, maybe even acceptable. The next day, Michael met me in secret at the grocery store. When I explained what had happened, he went pale. This changes everything, he murmured. Now he's using your daughter as leverage. That's even more serious than we thought. I can't take this chance away from her. Michael, I just can't. And you won't have to, he replied with a firmness I hadn't heard before. But we can't let him win either. I have an idea, but it'll take courage. A lot of it. As I walked back to the house, groceries heavy in my arms, I recognized the smell of a storm brewing. Not just in the darkening sky, but in my life itself. Some storms bring only destruction, while others clear the air and make everything visible. I just didn't know yet which one was coming for me. Michael's plan was bold, almost reckless. Let Jessica go to France, he explained calmly. While she's away, we document everything Richard does, every inappropriate comment, every instance of financial control, every restriction on your freedom. For the next 3 days, days, I followed his instructions to the letter. I hid a tiny recorder, borrowed from Mrs. Olivia, in different rooms around the house. I discreetly photographed incriminating documents in Richard's study, receipts for expensive gifts he forced on me, notes about expenses for Martha and the girl that appeared in his personal accounts as investments. Jessica left on a sunny morning in August, tears of excitement streaming down her cheeks at the airport. "I'll bring you back some real perfume from France, Mom," she promised, not realizing it would be the last time she saw me in that house. Richard was beaming, playing the role of generous benefactor, barely hiding his delight at watching me return alone to the mansion. "Now it's just the two of us," he remarked that night as I tidied up the kitchen. No more little girl to interrupt us. I took a deep breath, stepping into my role as the resigned woman. "Yes, Mr. Monroe, maybe now you'll finally understand your place in this household." The recorder in my apron pocket captured every word. A week later, everything came crashing down. Michael managed to obtain a restraining order against Richard, using the evidence we'd gathered. His lawyer friend, David Mendelsohn, filed a case for harassment and psychological abuse. The recordings were damning. Richard was served in his law firm's own conference room. That same day, officers arrived at the mansion to ensure I could collect my personal things without interference. Among them was my old Singer sewing machine, rescued from the dusty basement. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises safely," explained the court officer, a middle-aged woman with kind, steady eyes. "After that, the owner can return, but he's prohibited from approaching you." Mrs. Olivia brought over her son and 2 strong nephews to help. We loaded all my belongings into a rented moving van. As I closed the gates of the mansion for the last time, I felt an unforgettable mix of fear and relief, like leaping into the unknown, not sure if I'd land in water or on rocks. The apartment Michael found for me in Forest Hills was modest, but clean and filled with fresh air and sunlight. A second-floor walk-up with a small balcony, just big enough to see a sliver of the city. Skyline in the distance. The smell of new paint and old wood greeted me like an embrace. "It's just temporary," Michael said as his family unloaded my meager boxes, "until everything's settled in court and you get what you're owed." That first night alone, I set up my Singer near the living room window, running my hand over the cool metal, tracing every ridge and scratch I'd come to know by heart. The same machine that kept me afloat after Joe's death would be my path to a new beginning. At 43, a week later, I received Jessica's first international call. She was amazed by Paris, speaking too fast, peppering her English with the first words of French she'd picked up. "Mom, where are you?" I called. "The house," and a strange man answered. I told her the truth, as simply as I could, that things with Mr. Monroe had gone bad, that I'd left the mansion, and that now I was living on my own again, working with my sewing machine. "Are you really okay?" she asked, suddenly serious. "He was never very nice to you, was he?" Her teenage intuition caught me off guard. "I'm better than ever, sweetheart. And when you come home, we'll have a different life, maybe not as fancy, but it'll be ours. Promise you'll tell me everything when I'm back." I promised, and I meant to keep that promise when she was old enough to understand. Regaining my dignity was even harder than reclaiming my freedom. Those first months in Forest Hills forced me to rediscover myself, one painful day at a time. I'd wake up at night, heart racing, half believing I was still trapped in that grand house upstate. The peace of my little apartment seemed almost strange after years of constant surveillance. The Singer became my anchor. At first, I took small jobs, hemming jeans, replacing zippers, fixing buttons. Word spread, and soon former clients from before Richard found me again. The orders picked up: prom dresses, alterations for party gowns, even a few custom pieces. David Mendelsohn, the attorney Michael referred me to, fought tirelessly for my case. "What Richard did clearly amounts to emotional distress damages," he explained at our meetings. "And there's strong evidence he exploited your unpaid labor too." Richard, of course, hired his firm's toughest lawyers. He denied everything, painting me as an opportunist who'd taken advantage of his generosity for years. The legal battle dragged on for months, draining me both emotionally and financially. All that time, Jessica finished her semester abroad. When she returned 6 months later, she didn't go back to that mansion upstate. She came straight home to our apartment in Forest Hills. The teenager who stepped out of that taxi looked different, more mature, her eyes wiser and more aware. That night, sitting together on our little balcony with mugs of tea, I told Jessica the whole truth. The manipulation, the humiliation, the financial control, the long fight to escape. It all finally came out. She listened in silence, tears sliding down a face that looked more and more like mine every day. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she finally just. I wanted to protect you, to give you chances I never had myself, at the cost of your own happiness." Her voice had a new strength, one she'd maybe discovered on the streets of Paris. "It would never be worth it. Mom, I enrolled Jessica at a well-regarded public high school in the neighborhood. It was nothing like the elite boarding school upstate, but she adapted with surprising ease. The teachers here actually teach, instead of just trying to impress rich parents," she remarked after her first week. "At home, we shared responsibilities. She studied hard during the week, and on weekends she helped me with my sewing, discovering a natural gift for sketching out new designs. Together we began work on a small collection of one-of-a-kind dresses." The case against Richard moved forward painfully slowly. He used every trick in the book to drag it out, hoping I'd give up from sheer exhaustion. But he didn't know that. During those years of oppression, my determination had become unbreakable. For Jessica's 15th birthday, we celebrated with a small gathering in our apartment. Nothing like the fancy parties Richard could have thrown, but it was warm and genuine. Among the guests were Michael, now a constant friend, his mom, Mrs. Olivia, and several neighbors who had welcomed us into the community. While I was serving homemade cake, Michael caught my eye and nodded toward the kitchen. When I joined him, he spoke quietly. "The judge set a final hearing for next month," he said, a thoughtful smile on his face. "And there's news. 2 of Richard's previous employees came forward to testify. Their stories are eerily similar to yours." A chill ran up my spine. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, but for other women who'd been through the same nightmare. "We're going to win this, Martha," Michael said, resting his hand gently on my shoulder. It was a touch that gave strength, not control, different from anything I'd known with Richard. "You deserve justice." That night, watching Jessica sleep, I promised myself that whatever the court's decision, we'd already won the most important battle, the battle for our dignity, for our freedom. Everything else, no matter how hard, was just a matter of persistence. Justice rarely arrives the way we imagine. After nearly a year of legal struggle, the case against Richard ended in a settlement. He agreed to pay a substantial sum for years of unpaid labor and emotional distress, but without admitting guilt publicly. David Mendelsohn explained it was the best possible outcome. Cases against men in power rarely end with open admissions of guilt. The settlement, combined with my savings and what was left of Joe's insurance, was enough to make an impossible dream come true. Buying our own home. Not a mansion upstate, but a bright, simple house in Forest Hills with a small backyard and an extra room I converted into a sewing studio. At 17, Jessica was preparing applications for college, aiming for pre-law. Her drive wasn't inspired by Richard, but by what we'd lived through. "I want to stand up for women like you, Mom," she said, as we pored over her study guides at our kitchen table. "No one should have to go through what you did in silence." My little sewing business flourished. I expanded from repairs to designing exclusive pieces. The hands that used to shake from fear could now stitch with steady, renewed confidence. I even hired 2 young women from our community, passing on a craft that time and again had helped save my life. Michael remained a steady presence. At first, he was simply a friend and my financial advisor, helping me invest part of the settlement. But over time, he became something more. Our first real date didn't happen until nearly 2 years after I'd left the mansion, long enough for me to relearn how to trust, to see affection instead of control. "I'm not in any hurry," he told me one Sunday afternoon as we walked through the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. "I respect your pace and your story." And he did. Never a comment that sounded like a judgment about my looks. Never a gift that felt like a transaction. Just small, meaningful gestures. A book I'd mentioned wanting. A new tool for my workshop. A plant for our backyard. Always for us. Never just for him. One Saturday morning, while we were having coffee on the porch, the phone rang. It was Richard's secretary. He'd suffered a severe stroke and was partially paralyzed. There was no one around to care for him. His wife had filed for divorce years back, and his children were living far away, estranged in every sense of the word. "He's asking to see you," the secretary said quietly. "He insists he has something important to say." The hospital seemed smaller than I remembered, less intimidating. Richard lay in the bed, surrounded by tubes and machines, now just a frail old man. The power that once terrified me was long gone, vanished along with his health. I came because I wanted to, I told him before he could speak. Not out of pity or because I owe you anything. He nodded with difficulty, his face half frozen. I know, he managed, voice thick and slurred. You were always stronger than I realized. There were no grand confessions or dramatic apologies, just a quiet recognition that time, in its own way, balances the scales. When I left, I carried no heaviness of the past, only the lightness that comes from finally closing a painful chapter. The following week, Jessica got her acceptance letter to Columbia's pre-law program, first in her class, at our backyard. Celebration, surrounded by real friends and the family we'd rebuilt. I raised my glass. To our journey, I said, looking at my daughter, nearly grown and standing eye to eye with me. For every time we've been knocked down, and every time we got back up. And to the bravest seamstress in New York City, Michael added with a grin, squeezing my hand. That night, when the guests had gone, I sat alone on the porch, thinking back on everything we'd been through. From the starry-eyed girl who'd fallen for Joe, to the desperate widow trapped in Richard's grip, to the independent woman I'd fought so hard to become. Every stitch in my old Singer had been a step toward freedom. My story didn't end as a fairy tale, but as something far more valuable, a real life built with my own hands, sewn together with threads of courage, persistence, and finally, self-love, the kind of fabric that stands the test of time and weathers every storm still to come.